Okay, Jacob, you can start.
Thank you, Joel. Good morning, everyone. Good evening, or wherever you are.
Yes,
Yes, sir. Please turn off your videos and audios because it might interfere with with whatever you're doing. And so, especially for those people who are drinking coffee or doing other things, it's better not to have the video on. Later on, we'll let you interface with the speaker. So for now, let's all take off the video and also the audio. This is the series of lectures and panel discussions that the ARPA Institute organizes, and I welcome you everybody in the name of the ARPA Institute. Just a few words before we start about the ARPA Institute, what it is and what it does. ARPA is an organization of experts that has been working in Armenia since 1992, working with the institutes of the Academy of Sciences, with the universities, and with the government to help advance science, technology, health, education, and all the other expertise that is required in Armenia. And we also have projects that are ongoing, and we've done quite a few projects in the past. We have a website that you can visit and find out what ARPA does and what has been done before. It is http://www.arpainstitute.org. We have activities going on with several institutes of the Academy of Sciences, like the Physical Research Institute in Artsakh, the Molecular Biology Institute in Yerevan, the Alikhanyan National Lab in Yerevan, and several others, and also with the Yerevan State University, as well as the Polytechnic University. We also work with several different ministries, especially with the Science, Education, Culture, and Sports Ministry. And lately, we just had the first official science fair in Armenia with participation of 44 teams of students having innovative projects. And for the first time in the history, Armenia participated in the International Science and Engineering Fair, and we sponsored that participation. 2 projects were participating, and one of these 2 actually won a 4th place prize of $500, which for the first year, I think is a tremendous win. And we hope that this science fair activities will actually take place in all schools of Armenia eventually. Because the main objective is to teach the students how to think in a scientific manner and how to solve problems scientifically, and also be able to be innovative, think about an innovation, and actually carry out experimentation, research, and also be able to present it both on a display board and also discuss it and convince the judges that your project is better than the others. So it gives the students several different expertise and capabilities. Also, we have several other programs that are ongoing. We have the annual invention competition for young scientists, where we accept inventions and we send it to experts. They evaluate it, and then we decide the best ones and award them with monetary awards, and also try to help them, guide them so that they can achieve their product eventually. We also have other activities going on, like, for example, we are planning to start a quantum technology research and development center in Armenia. And we've been working with the World Bank since 2019, but then with the COVID and everything stopped, I guess. And now we are trying to reactivate that process. We are in the process right now of constructing a clean room for the Alikhanyan National Lab, which is the former physics institute. It's one of the best institutes in the Academy of Sciences. And this is the first of its kind. It will be a 1,000 class clean room where scientists will be able to carry out sensitive experimentation. So we do things like that to help Armenia advance in science, technology, and other areas. Our experts work with other ministries, like, for example, the Ministry of Health, Ministry of High Technology and Industry, and several other ministries. And we try to organize also sometimes conferences. Like a couple of years ago, we organized a conference on the economic development of Armenia, and there were quite a few international presenters, and the Ministry of Finance also participated officially. And so that's the kind of activities ARPA organizes. If there is anybody who considers himself or herself an expert in any area, you can join ARPA and help us achieve more. And also all our efforts that we have in Armenia, all the activities and all the construction and instrumentation donations are through the donations of the community. So if you feel like we are doing good work, then please donate. Go online to the arpainstitute.org and donate. Now, to introduce our speaker today will be Dr. Ani Shahbazian. She will be moderating the presentation. And Ani is a professor at Loyola Marymount School of Law, and she's the director of the educational system, Children's Educational Center in Loyola Marymount University. Ani, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Panosyan, and thank you to the ARPA Institute for featuring yet another important conversation that helps us keep connected to our roots and understand a little bit about our past so that we can move forward together. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Pietro Charents. He is a historian of Russia and Soviet Union with a focus on Armenia and the Caucasus during the era of Nikita Khrushchev's Thaw. He earned his PhD in history at the Ohio State University, his MA in Russian, Eastern European, and Eurasian Studies at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. His MLIS is from Kent State University, and his BA in history is from John Carroll University in Cleveland. Dr. Charents has written analysis on current affairs in Russia and post-Soviet space for various publications, including The Nation magazine, the Cleveland Plain Dealer, the Russian International Affairs Council, and so much more. It is an honor and a pleasure to have you here today, Dr. Charents.
Thank you, Ani, for that wonderful introduction, and thank you, Jakob, for bringing me on today. It's a great pleasure to be here. And so today I would like to talk about my PhD dissertation research, which basically centers on the role of Anastas Mikoyan, prominent Soviet Armenian political figure, in de-Stalinization in Soviet Armenia and in the Soviet Union in general, right? And actually my dissertation takes a much wider view. So it looks at the role of his Armenian identity in developing the post-Stalin Soviet nationality policy. Now I have one chapter devoted to Mikoyan's role in de-Stalinization in Armenia and this whole process, and his speech in March 1954. So I'm going to focus on that today. That's going to be the thrust of my presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to share the screen, and I will show you this work. So this is what I call Yerevan 1954, the role of Anastas Mikoyan during the post-Stalin era in Armenia. And this history is really quite remarkable. So To give you an idea, I worked extensively in the Armenian archives, the Russian archives. I worked extensively with Armenian memoirs, Armenian language memoirs, Russian language memoirs, and I really, really, really put my all into this. And not only that, I discovered some extraordinary new information that really kind of challenges conventional views of Soviet history and opens new doors in the ways in which we understand Soviet Armenia, right? So kind of to start off, Yerevan 1954, why this date of 1954? Specifically March 11th, 1954. Because it was on this date that Anastas Mikoyan came to Yerevan and gave a speech that really played a very decisive role in the process of de-Stalinization for Armenia and for the USSR in general. And I'll show you what I mean in a moment. First of all, how does multiculturalism impact Russian and Soviet politics? This is actually a question that gets at the heart of my research, and it shows that when you have a multi-ethnic state, a state that takes in many different ethnicities. So here you can see, like, Ukrainians, you can see Belarusians, you can see Georgians, Armenians, Uzbeks, Kazakhs, all these different nationalities in the Soviet state, and all these nationalities help inform and develop the politics and the history of this country, of the USSR and the Russian Empire. So that's kind of that. And really, this history begins, at least I'm starting this point, with the death of Stalin on March 5th, 1953, right? So this is a moment when Stalin dies that things really begin to change in the Soviet Union for Armenia and for the country in general. And kind of, we think conventionally in the Soviet history, and this is why I'm going to kind of challenge what we know conventionally about Soviet history. We tend to think that the de-Stalinization process really begins with Nikita Khrushchev's speech of February 1956 at the 20th Congress of the Soviet Communist Party, which was on the cult of personality and its consequences, this blistering attack on Stalin and Stalinism that Khrushchev gives. But in reality, this is just the culmination point of a process that had been really beginning and kind of, developing since the death of Stalin in 1953, but a process that also Mikoyan played a very significant role in. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. So we look at the Soviet Union at this time. This is the USSR in this period. This is the USSR in 1954, when Mikoyan gives a speech. This is the Caucasus region in 1954. And you can see here the very strange borders, especially over by Georgia in the North Caucasus, where North Caucasian nationalities were deported en masse by Stalin and Beria during the 1940s. And how actually many of their lands were transferred to Soviet Georgia. So this is kind of the setup we have. This is an actual map of the Soviet Caucasus in 1954 with Armenia. And this is Mikoyan's speech of March 11, 1954. And what's incredible about the speech is he calls for a new Soviet nationality policy that's more sensitive to national sensitivities. He condemns this idea of national chauvinism, which is what the Soviets were always condemning, but also the idea of national nihilism, which is an insensitivity to national cultures and national, literatures and all these sorts of things. And when we think about that, when he was, invoking this idea, he specifically referred to the Soviet official attitude toward the works of Raffi and Patkanyan, saying we should not dismiss these as kind of bourgeois authors, that they were authors of national liberation. Their works are very important to the Armenian people, and they should, be seen as such, be seen as these very important works for Armenian history. And the irony, of course, is that he gave the speech in the shadow of a portrait of Stalin. And why was that significant? Well, when we talk about Stalin in this context, Mikoyan invoked, the name of a victim of Stalin's terror, Charents. So the first time Charents' name had been uttered since 1937, since his arrest, was in this speech on March 11, 1954. And this was an incredible moment, as a matter of fact. So it had the speech both kind of set the ball rolling for de-Stalinization, but also introduced this idea of a more liberalized Soviet nationality policy. And of course, Mikoyan was plagued by his own guilt. So I have, in addition to my research on Mikoyan's role in de-Stalinization, I've also studied in depth Mikoyan's role in the purges in Armenia in the 1930s. And not only did I look into the Russian archives, the Russian State Archive, the Russian State Archive for Social Political History, the Armenian archives in Yerevan, I also consulted historians at the Memorial International Society in Moscow. And they gave me documents that are classified from the FSB Central Archive and from the Russian Presidential Archive that shows the process of what actually went on, right? So Mikoyan, as it turns out, was forced to participate in this episode by Stalin himself, who supervised every single move. And this really begins when Beria assassinates Agassi Khanjian, the Soviet Armenian leader, and brings into power his minions, Amatuni, and also Hachik Mogdusi, the feared head of the NKVD in Armenia, to really purge the republic. And they are the ones who actually killed Sahak Tergabrelian. And this invited Stalin's wrath because they did not inform Stalin that they had killed Tergabrelian. And so Stalin sent Melenkov and Litvin to purge the Armenian leadership. And a few days later, he sent Mikoyan as well. Mikoyan did not arrive with Melenkov and Litvin. He came several days later. And Stalin closely supervised every single move that was being made. If you look at these documents, the level of supervision that Stalin gave to this operation is really intense. So you have that, but Mikoyan, of course, he's not innocent. He himself plays a role in this purges, but he feels guilty for that years later. This is somebody who Stalin didn't trust because he had actually participated in attempting to save many people from the terror in the 1930s. And you see here a letter from the Composers Union, basically celebrating Mikoyan's exposure of these kind of spies, Dajnak Trotskyite spies in Armenia, this sort of thing. So this kind of gives you a sense of the environment that existed at the time, a really terrible environment in the 1930s. But when we fast forward to the 1950s, in 1953, after Stalin's death, there's kind of a new opening. And Mikoyan really kind of tests the water for this new opening through the poet Horacio Kochar, who at the Armenian Party Congress at the beginning of 1954 kind of brings out these issues of Raffi and also Charents to kind of test the waters, how this would be received if we're going to rehabilitate them. And actually it was received very well, but his praise of Charents was not as strong as Mikoyan's would be in 1954. But there's also another aspect of this as well. So when we look at kind of these individuals that are being mentioned, Raffi and Patkanyan, right, the mention of Charents, which is very important. This also comes in a context where after Stalin dies in 1953, after Beria is arrested and then executed at the end of 1953, Mikoyan begins receiving all sorts of letters from basically victims of the terror, family members of terror victims, of victims of the purges, I should say. And basically all these members of all these individuals requesting rehabilitation of loved ones were writing to Mikoyan, and the mention of Charents in some ways was like a signal, but I'm going to get to that in a moment. So for now, you have Raffi and Patkanyan, two authors, by the way, whom Mikoyan loved in his youth. If you read Mikoyan's memoirs, he mentions his youthful love for Samvel and The Fool, these great, Raffi novels. And in his original draft of his speech, we have the original versions in the Moscow archives, he actually lambasts the former Armenian leadership as a bunch of raiders and ignoramuses for not understanding the genius of Raffi and Patkanyan and not understanding that they were actually national liberation authors, that their ideas were effectively compatible with socialism, that they were not opposed to the ideas of the Soviet state and the Soviet Union. But here we come to the poet Charents. And as I was mentioning about Charents, this mention of him was a signal that not only got the ball rolling in terms of de-Stalinization, but also really was a signal to all these individuals who had written letters to Mikoyan requesting rehabilitation of loved ones who had been imprisoned by Stalin's regime and had been really their lives had been destroyed by Stalin's regime. And all of a sudden, days after Mikoyan mentions Charents' name in this speech, just days after, actually, I would say this actually after in April, really. By April, the numbers of letters he receives from people requesting rehabilitations. Now, these are also people who largely were old Bolsheviks from the Caucasus, from Baku, and about 50% were Armenian, and the rest were others, Russians, Georgians, Jews, different nationalities. And the numbers of letters Mikoyan receives after mentioning Charents mushrooms. So this was a signal to many people that the state would be open to rehabilitations. This is an incredible moment. As a friend of mine told me in Yerevan, at that moment when Mikoyan mentions Charents' name, and you can hear it in the audio, which I have from the Armenian National Archives, the intensity of the applause is a moment by which everything really changes. So Mikoyan mentions Charents, the great writer who was killed in the purges in 1937 by Amatuni and Mogdusi. And his wording on Charents' death in the original text of his speech, in the original draft, is actually much stronger. It was inadmissible, he says. So, nedopustimi. He uses this word, inadmissible. There's much, much stronger language. And later he changes to nepravony. He changes to incorrect. So the former authorities were incorrect in the speech that he gave in 1954. But the draft, his language is much stronger. And this is very, very significant. And the impact was immediate. So one of the people who was listening to the speech as it was being broadcast in Yerevan in 1954 was the artist Regina Ghazarian, who was a very close friend of Charents. After Charents was arrested, he instructed Ghazarian to basically bury his manuscripts. And when she heard the name Charents, you can see it here in this text, when she heard that name, that Mikoyan uttered the name Charents, suddenly she was inspired, almost delirious, to exhume the manuscripts. So this is literally a moment by which Charents is, kind of coming back. He's coming back to life. There was a great Armenian scholar who said that this was an explicit signal to bring the poet back to life, right? And we also have even paintings. So Regina Ghazarian even made a painting where she highlights this moment of 1937, what happens in 37 versus in 54, with 54 being this release, if you will. So it's a very, very key moment. Let me just move this over here. Okay. It's a very key moment in the Armenian history, as we shall see. Also, Mikoyan invokes the famous Armenian Soviet statesman, Alexander Myasnikan. Let me just move this over here. Alexander Myasnikan, who was really a man who acted as a savior for Armenia. In the time when after Armenia was suffering from years of famine, genocide, the Civil War era, Myasnikan comes in. He's brought in by Moscow. And he really is kind of responsible for rebuilding Armenia in this period, but the official narrative actually kind of pushes him out. He died in a plane crash in 1925, which some suspect might have been the work of Lavrenti Beria, who was not really, favorably disposed toward Armenians, to put it lightly. So Mikoyan mentions Myasnikan as well too, and this also is met with very loud applause. In the original drafts, he also mentioned Stepan Shahumyan, and Shahumyan was like Mikoyan's mentor. Mikoyan was a participant in the experiment of the Baku Commune in 1918, and Shahumyan was almost like an older brother to Mikoyan. So he was originally mentioned more extensively in the speech than he eventually was, but he was mentioned as well. And the speech was so well received that we even have document from the Armenian archives that request to the Armenian leadership to print 10,000 copies of this speech in Armenian translation, because it was delivered in Russian with Armenian elements, right? But Mikoyan, to maximize his audience, he gives this speech in Russian primarily. Now, in Pravda, ironically enough, the speech is the sections that are most important, the sections that call for a more liberalized policy toward nationalities and that call for really rehabilitating Charents. These are not included in the edition printed by Pravda, although they are included in the edition printed in Kommunist. However, this speech was published as a booklet, where the publication, the tirage, this was about 100,000 copies were printed. So people throughout the Soviet Union would have known about the speech, and they did know about the speech. And we also have this interesting piece of history, which is that days after the speech, so the speech Mikoyan gave on March 11th, 1954. On March 18th, 1954, a review commission was set up in Armenia that dealt, by and large, with rehabilitation requests. So, all right, this is just days after Mikoyan gives the speech. A review commission, a Rosmatrenia commission, is set up in Armenia on March 18th, 1954, including the Republic's top leaders, right? And this commission begins to review different cases about people who are wrongfully expelled from the party, people who are wrongfully exiled, wrongfully arrested. And so this is another key moment in this history as it evolves. And this is actually the Armenian First Secretary at the time, Suren Tovmasyan, who gives a full detailed report about the different types of letters that were received. Some of them actually dealt with, issues like housing and these sorts of things, but the meat of this was about rehabilitations. And we also see Mikoyan was very concerned with rehabilitations himself, not only in Armenia, but throughout the whole Soviet Union, but particularly in Armenia. He pays special attention. And he signs off here in his blue pencil on all these individual rehabilitation cases. This is in Moscow now. So this is in the Russian State Archive. If you go to the Russian State Archive, you can find these files in Fund 5446. And he literally has signed off each case. He's supervising each case. And in some instances, we have letters such as this one to Anton Kochinyan that he writes, where he says, let me know about the progress of these cases. Let me know about the outcomes of what's going on. And also, this process of rehabilitation involved Shahumyan's son. So Lev Shahumyan played a very big role in assisting Mikoyan with helping rehabilitate people. And they also played a significant role in introducing many of these, or introducing really Khrushchev to people who had been repressed by Stalin's regime. So Olga Shatanovskaya, who was a victim, who was actually, she was a fellow revolutionary in the Baku party leadership, very close to Mikoyan, her together with Alexei Snegov, another good friend of Mikoyan. Both of these individuals, Shatanovskaya and Snegov, were victims of the terror. They were people who had been exiled. They had experienced the Gulag. They had experienced the worst of the repressions. And so Mikoyan basically introduces them to Khrushchev, and they play a key role in informing the information that Khrushchev gives in his speech of February 1956, the big de-Stalinization speech, right? So you have that. And also you have instances like this, where we can see directly that Mikoyan's speech is influencing people to write to him. So for instance, we have a letter here from Igor Pastupalsky, who is a poet, who was a, he's a Ukrainian writer, and he was responsible for developing a Russian translation, a Russian translation of an anthology of Charents' poetry in the 1930s. And it would have included translations by such luminaries as Anna Akhmatova and Boris Pasternak. So if you know the film Dr. Zhivago, Boris Pasternak was the author of that novel upon which the film, the David Lean film, was based. And this, what ends up happening is after Charents is arrested, this book project is completely, cut. It's completely stopped. But Postupalski has the manuscript, and Postupalski is also somebody who was repressed. He was sent to Kolyma, which is one of the worst areas you could be in during the Stalinist repressions. And he met some Armenians who knew Charents. And according to Postupalski, in this letter that he sent to Mikoyan, he said that the Soviet leadership, in particular Mikoyan, should know that Charents' last testimony was that he be rehabilitated gradually over time, and first and foremost to republish this very special book of translations of his poetry in Russian. And that was eventually published shortly thereafter, that work. Edited by Postupalski. But in addition, even if you look at Charents' rehabilitation file, so Charents, even though Mikoyan mentions him in 54 in the speech, he's not rehabilitated until 1955. I've consulted the Charents case in the Armenian National Archives in Yerevan, and informing the case was the speech that Mikoyan gave. It's extensively quoted. There's a document here that shows this speech being extensively quoted. So this speech informs the Armenian authorities on the rehabilitation of Charents. In addition, we also have shortly after Charents is mentioned in the speech, even before he's rehabilitated, already you see the republication of Charents' works. You see dramatic readings, such as that we have advertised here, of Charents' poetry in Yerevan. We also have the republication of Raffi. Suddenly Raffi is republished. And in this article in Communist, it even refers to Mikoyan's speech of 1954. And again, we cannot overlook the close relationship between Mikoyan and Khrushchev in this de-Stalinization process. And this is also reflected even in the 20th Party Congress. Mikoyan kind of, according to the great American journalist Harrison Salisbury, Mikoyan kind of strikes out ahead of Khrushchev and lays the ground for de-Stalinization, not only with the Yerevan speech of 1954, but even at the 20th Party Congress. He delivers a condemnation of Stalin right before Khrushchev, right? And in addition, Soren Tovmasyan, the first secretary of Armenia, gives a speech where he refers to Charents and Charents' quote of Moscow being the center of the world. So Charents, just within the scope of a few years, is already coming back and becoming really the standard of Armenian literature again, right? And the speech has another important aspect in the Armenian history, which is that the speech creates the conditions for this period known as the Thaw, or Zinhali Jamanak in the Armenian language, but the Thaw Utepel in Russian. This is a major period of liberalization. In Armenia, the effects are felt right away. I have reports from the Russian archives showing the impact of Khrushchev's speech on the growth of Armenian cultural expression. And in addition, we also have members of the Armenian intelligentsia who are citing Mikoyan's speech really as the starting point. But that period of the Thaw, as Razmik Panosyan, the author of the book The Armenians, a great scholar, wrote that the protests in Yerevan of 1965 and also the Karabakh movement of 1988 would not have been possible without this period of really de-Stalinization, the Thaw in Armenia, which are very, very crucial to the Armenian history. And we also have the story of Mikoyan and Karabakh. Mikoyan supported Armenian leaders when they raised this issue of Karabakh. And this is kind of very relevant to what we have the history of today. And Sergo Mikoyan later became one of the leaders or one of the early voices advocating reunification of Karabakh with Armenia. And hopefully I can talk about this a little bit more in the Q&A, because I've also researched this issue very much in depth as well. And Mikoyan also played a major role in Armenia, advocating as kind of a lobbyist for Yerevan in Moscow. So if the Armenian government needed funds to pass a major infrastructure project, Mikoyan was there to help them realize such a project. So this is Mikoyan in Mekri in 1962 with Anton Kochinyan being greeted with a lavash and salt as he came in. And here he is in Gapan, in Zengezur, also during the 1962 visit. And in Sanain, he visits Sanain frequently. This is his hometown in Alaverdi in Lori region. So he's always up here assisting with major projects. And the crowds at the time in Armenia were massive, right? And not only in photographs like these, which come from the Armenian archive, by the way, but also in footage. I have footage from Avag Harutyunyan of the Armenian Kino Photo Archive in Yerevan, where the amount of people in Armenia is at these visits, these receptions of Mikoyan is just staggering. It's just simply staggering. And here you have this again in Gapan, meeting with voters. So Mikoyan was also representing Armenia as a Supreme Soviet deputy too. And so you see here him at the Opera Theater with Kochinyan and Zarobian, the first secretary of Armenia, and Kochinyan at the time head of the Council of Ministers of Armenia. And this is him giving his speech in Yerevan in March 1962, which is also important because he is, as I will tell you, praising Khrushchev for assisting in the Arpa-Sivan Canal project, which Mikoyan played a role in helping Armenian leaders with. This is Mikoyan meeting with Marshal Bagramian. Actually, Mikoyan and his brother Artyom are meeting with Marshal Bagramian and Marietta Shaginian in this photograph. And Bagramian was a good friend of the Mikoyan brothers as well, but also meeting with Victor Hambartsumyan. Also, we mentioned the Alikhanyan lab, and so he knows Alikhanyan. He's meeting with Alikhanyan. But this is somebody who really is very integrated with the Armenian scene. But this is the most interesting photograph that I want to kind of touch on, which is that Mikoyan advised Armenian leaders on the passage of the Arpa-Sivan Canal project. So as we know, because the Lake Sivan's waters were diminishing as a result of the hydroelectric projects that had been implemented during Stalin's time, the real problem emerged for Armenian leaders in the 50s, which was how to restore and rescue Lake Sivan, restore its water levels. And they decided to build a canal, as we know the history of this. And really, they wanted to sell the idea to Khrushchev, but it was a very expensive idea because not only did they have to pay for the tunnel, but the associated infrastructure. And Mikoyan was the one who proposed to Zarobian and Kochinyan, look, you can propose this idea to Khrushchev without mentioning about the associated infrastructure, just given the cost of the tunnel. And they did that. They met with Khrushchev on Lake Sivan in 1961 when he visited Armenia, and it was a huge success. In the end, Armenia was able to get the Arpa-Sivan Canal passed. And in Mikoyan's speech of 1962, which I referred to earlier, he actually praised Khrushchev for his efforts in securing that canal for Armenia. So this is, some photos of Mikoyan, his family, extended family in Lori, but also here, his more immediate family in the Crimea. With Sergo we have, but also Sergo's wife, Alla Kuznetsova, who was the daughter of Alexei Kuznetsov, was another victim of Stalinism. So even in the family, Mikoyan has relations with people who have been victims of Stalinism, which is really a very interesting aspect of the history. Here again, more photographs, family photographs, photographs with the Armenian leadership. I could go on and on. A lot of these also come from the Moscow archives, so both Armenian archives, Russian archives. And he even visited Baku. And this is actually most interesting. Mikoyan had very good relations with the old multi-ethnic party leadership of Soviet Azerbaijan. He has this incredible reception, which is almost unheard of an Armenian leader today. He met with, in addition to paying homage to the Baku Commissars in the Baku commune, he also met with recently rehabilitated Baku Bolsheviks, old Bolsheviks, who were victims also of Stalinism. So this is my presentation in a nutshell of Mikoyan's role in de-Stalinization in Armenia and the USSR in general. And I thank you very much for your time and for sharing this research with you today.
Professor Shakarian, fascinating. Thank you so much for your time here today. I have a few follow-up questions before I open it up to the audience, if that's okay.
Mhm.
Okay, so
Certainly.
just some specifics that you did gloss over. I just want to ask, in taking notes, when you were talking about the identity of Mikoyan, what would you say he was? Would you say he's Soviet, Armenian, or a mix of both?
I would say he's definitely a mix of both. I think that he's very much committed to the Soviet experiment. He's very much a Soviet guy, right? But he also is very, very national. He's also very Armenian. So he never really gave up on that Armenian identity. There was a period early on, by the way, I saw one of the comments come in about Nami Mikoyan, Stas Namin's mother. I have consulted her memoir as well. I've consulted everything under the sun about Mikoyan. But when I talk about his dual identity, it's really quite interesting because in the Civil War period, there was a moment where he was somebody who really identified more with the internationalism.
Mhm.
But then he developed more this affinity, or he renewed his affinity with Armenian nationalism, right? So he actually started off as really an Armenian nationalist. He was really typical for his youth. His early ideology fused together both socialism and nationalism. I mean, this is somebody who fought with General Andranik's battalion during World War I.
Mm.
And even there's an interesting book that I have here, Bolsheviks in the Russian Empire by Liliana Riga, where she even makes the argument that Mikoyan's part of his support for the Soviet regime and his support for becoming a Bolshevik was informed by this idea that the Soviet Union and Russia were the best, it was the best thing to ensure the security and survival of the Armenian people, right? So Mikoyan was very, very closely in touch with his Armenian identity, but especially, even more so, I would argue, in the period of the Thaw. He really becomes very involved in Armenian affairs, lobbying for Yerevan in Moscow. If the Armenian leaders need money for a project, Yakov Zorobian or Anton Kochinyan say, Anastas Ivanovich, we need this, we need funding for this. Zotov says we can't get it passed, or this minister says we can't get this project passed. It's impossible. That they say that you can't grow this on an Armenian land because it's so dry, but we need this canal, let's say, if we're talking about the Arpasavan Canal or any of these canals. And yet Mikoyan was able to, kind of finesse his way through. He knew Khrushchev personally. He was able to kind of get that passed. Help the Armenian leadership get those projects passed. So it is really, really, really fascinating history.
Okay, thank you. How would you say the genocide in 1915 impacted his outlook on Armenia?
Well, this again kind of goes to what I was referencing with Liliana Riga.
Right.
This impacted him tremendously because suddenly when the infrastructure there of Russia is gone,
right,
and you have just the Armenian Republic, they're exposed to more or less now Eastern Armenia is exposed to genocide, right? Because Turkey's plan is not just limited to Western Armenia. They want to wipe all the Armenians out, and he understands this, and he thinks but more interesting, Ani, is when you look at his notes that I found in Moscow for his 1954 speech. His original drafts are actually informed by the genocide in some ways. He writes that the fate of the Western Armenians, that would have been the fate of Eastern Armenia had it not been for Russia, had it not been for the Soviet Union. If there was no Soviet Union, if there was no Russia, then we would have been wiped out completely. And he's writing this in these notes, which actually were not known until I really looked at them. So yeah, and so the genocide again impacts this idea that the Soviet Union acts as kind of a protective shield for Armenia to protect them against Turkish attack and genocide and all this.
And that had it not been for Russia, that entire eastern province would not have been granted. Okay.
Absolutely.
So maybe let's talk a little bit about, it's a good segue to Russian-Armenian relations. And not necessarily, we can shift to recent times, but what can this history tell us, or how can this inform us about what's going on with Russia and Armenia today?
Well, I would say, first of all, number one, if we look at this history, what does it tell us? It tells us that, first of all, Armenia benefits not only by having Russia there to provide the security, but also benefits by, giving Armenia more exposure to the world. And also that Armenians have an opportunity to elevate themselves up within the Russian system, whether it be the Soviet system or Imperial Russian system, without losing that identity. Right now, there are some Armenians who would say, well, you look at Mikoyan or Adam Hachaturian, they became Muscovites, right? They're not there. They lost their Armenianness. This is kind of what people perceive, but the reality is they never lost touch with their Armenianism. And actually, they, like I said, kind of acted as lobbyists for the Armenian interests in Moscow and helped kind of give more exposure to Armenians, Armenia, Armenian culture, globally. For what I would suggest today, if I could say anything to Armenian leaders today about that, I would say, don't assume you know Russia. I would say that what you need to do is, first of all, enhance knowledge of Armenia in Russia. So when I was working in the Russian archives in Moscow, when I was working in the social political archive, the Russian State Social Political Archive in Moscow, they have a bookstore. And they had, I couldn't believe in the bookstore, translations of Justin McCarthy's denialist tracts of the Armenian genocide in Russian. And I thought, my God, where are the Armenians? Armenians know Russian. They should be counteracting this. The Turks, the Ankara, with their diplomacy, they are finessing getting this garbage, which is completely ahistorical, into Russian archive bookstores. The Armenians should be very much aware of this, and they should be taking action to stop this, right? And so that could be one way. But in general, there should also be efforts, just as there have been in recent years in Armenia, where the effort has been to study, Turkish politics. More should be done to study Russian politics and to understand what are the dynamics in the Kremlin, to really kind of unpack this, not just assume that you know these guys because you were part of the same country for 70 years, or even longer, 200 years, you could take back to the Tsar's time.
Right.
But to also understand the dynamics of the politics today.
What would you, just going back to the comment you made about the tapes, the Russian transcripts, what's a good practical piece of advice you can give to Armenians to help put their voice out there?
Well, like I said, they can do more, like, somebody like Ruben Vartanyan can help sponsor the translation of really good scholarly works on the Armenian genocide and have them in the Russian archives. That's not a hard thing to do. Armenians know Russian, right? It's not, this isn't rocket science, right? They can do things like that. They can also, again, enhance those ties with kind of Russian analysts, Russian commentators, and really kind of figure out what's going on in the high level Kremlin politics. In actually the Armenians in Mikoyan's time in Yerevan actually had something of an advantage, because they would see Mikoyan, they'd meet with him in Moscow in his dacha, and he would say, well, this is what's going on in the Politburo. I'm going to let you know, give you the lowdown, that kind of a thing. And this is how you should frame your proposal based on that, right? And Armenian leaders have to have their ear to the ground in a similar way now. Right. I mean, they can make those connections with Russia. They can have like think tanks, or they can, again, you have people like Ruben Vartanyan, people who are very rich Russian Armenians, who can do very simple things like the translation of Armenian historical works into Russian that can be then distributed in the Russian National Archives, right? So things like that. And I think
sorry to interrupt you, Dr. Charents. Do you think it's fiscal resources that's prevented us, or what? Because I can't imagine the translations costing that much, or the transcriptions. What do you think are some of the obstacles that prevent us from doing?
I think first of all, half the battle is you got to be aware.
Yeah.
Right. You got to be aware, and also I think part of it is about fiscal resources, but also an overwhelming mentality among Armenian political elites and even members of people in Armenia, Armenian citizens and members of the Armenian diaspora in Russia, that, well, we know them, they know us, and that sort of thing. You can't just rest on that assumption that we know them and they know us. We Armenians have to take more proactive steps to really kind of enhance Russia's understanding of, for instance, the seriousness of what's happening right now. in the Caucasus and in Karabakh, Artsakh. So things like that, I think it's not just, I think fiscal issues are just part of it, but also it's a matter of awareness.
Right.
You know, and just not just like assuming that they know, you know, you have to really kind of put your voice out there.
And speaking of Karabakh, if we can talk about this, you touched upon it in your presentation, but what was the position of Mikoyan toward the issue of Artsakh?
Well, Mikoyan's position really kind of, it goes back to how we understand the Soviet Azerbaijani leadership. Azerbaijani leadership in the 1920s was very cosmopolitan. It was very multi-ethnic. You had people like even Mirzoyan, an Armenian, was first secretary of Azerbaijan. You had, you know, Sergei Kirov, who was later killed in the 1930s, you know, many people would say by Stalin, who was also the first secretary of Azerbaijan, a Russian, right? So it was, the leadership was very internationalist at first, but then in the 1930s, especially with Bagirov coming to power in Azerbaijan, the orientation of the Azerbaijani Republic became more chauvinistic and more assimilationist and more intolerant of minorities. Already the Artsakh Armenians, the Karabakh Armenians, didn't really want to be part of Azerbaijan to begin with. They wanted to be part of Armenia. But even within the Azerbaijani framework, the discrimination that they had raised against the Azerbaijani party leadership, that was really a very, very serious issue that was kind of coming in this effort of Baku to assimilate these people. In that context, Mikoyan would support the desires of the Karabakh Armenians and the Soviet Armenian leaders who raised the issue of reunification between Karabakh and Armenia. Beginning with Arutinov, but not only Arutinov, you also had Kochinyan, you had Zarobian, all these leaders raising this issue of reunification. But especially when we got into the period of the Thaw, you had the rise of something known as socialist legality or zakonnost, which is this idea of that, for instance, if two republics are going to, that everything has to be done by the book. We had just been through this period of Stalinism, of one-man dictatorship. Now we want to do things by the book. So, for instance, if you're going to change territory between two republics, you need the mutual consent of those republics. Now, you know, I mean, Ukraine and Russia with Crimea, it's like old home week. You have Slavic brothers there. I mean, at least in those days, now it's a different scenario, but they could easily agree. Now, you know, if the Armenians are saying, you know, transfer, maybe you could transfer Karabakh to Armenia, you know, Azerbaijan consistently vetoed that. So Baku, official Baku, and to a point, by the way, that I just want to add this point, that Sergei Mikoyan in his memoirs recalled an episode where there was an Azerbaijani official who met with his father, with Mikoyan, at his dacha in Moscow, and Mikoyan like yelled at him and said basically, you know what, Baku, what they're doing is absolutely unacceptable, and moreover, I really hope, because really Azerbaijan was in violation of the Soviet nationality policy, that you are not planning to expel the Karabakh Armenians like you did with the Armenians in Nakhichevan, right? So he really understood the seriousness of the situation, but he was not all powerful. He was not like a guy who could simply lift Karabakh up and give it to Armenia. Was
he not as influential? Do you feel like maybe he wasn't as influential as an advocate as
he wasn't as influential? I agree. He was not as influential as people assume. You know, even within the Soviet leadership, he had to be careful to some degree with Khrushchev, but it was just a matter that he wasn't as influential as people assume. Right? There's an assumption that everybody thinks because he was a Soviet high official, he could do anything. Right. But not everybody, you know, had like, I mean, he wasn't omnipotent. You know, I mean, it wasn't like this kind of situation. So
that's why Artsakh did, in fact, end up under Azeri control.
And it remained under Azerbaijani control. So.
One more question before I open it up to the audience. I'm just curious, what led you to study Mikoyan and Soviet Armenia?
Well, it goes back to my family history. My father is an Armenian from Romania, and he grew up under communism in Romania. And for me, it was always interesting to figure out, you know, kind of the history of Armenians and communism. And from there, I was interested in the history of Soviet Armenia, which I felt was a very understudied subject, even in the Armenian language, by the way. of the Armenian history that I think we should know more about, because it would help bring Armenia and the diaspora closer together. So I think that's why my history is all about connections between Russia and Armenia, connections between Armenia and Artsakh, let's say, or Armenia and diaspora, most important. So that's kind of how I see it. I see this as kind of a way of getting to, or moving toward, our understanding of the Soviet Armenian history, which has been very understudied, and which, I mean, I applaud people who've done excellently. Raymond Kevorkian did a beautiful book on the genocide. You know, bravo. Richard Hovhannisyan did excellent work on the First Republic. Beautifully researched, magnificent series. But we have to also look at the history of Soviet Armenia too. We cannot neglect this piece of the history as well.
So true, and advocating for, as you were saying earlier, our future path, right? The suggestions you have for our future administration, whoever, you know, whatever happens with the administration in Armenia right now, what you're advocating for is improved relations, or an improved understanding of Russian politics, what's going on, and having our think tank, our think leaders be a little bit more connected, correct?
Yes, absolutely. And if any, I mean, I already am getting some messages here from some, also there's an interesting message about Kemalism's collaboration with, you know, the Soviet leadership or with the Bolsheviks. If I had more time, I would delve into that too, because Mikoyan actually talks to Armenian historians about that in the 60s. It's a really fascinating conversation. I wish I had more time. I don't have more time. I can delve into a lot of these issues, but I will say, I got one message here from somebody saying that they know Raffi and Patkanyan and that they'd be willing to talk to him about the issue of the translations. And I think definitely anybody who knows somebody like that, who knows Raffi and Patkanyan or anybody like him who can help, please do, because this is a very simple thing that can be done. And
would they be
Armenians
able to contact you, Dr. Shakarian?
They can contact. Please do contact me.
Do you mind putting your info in the chat as well, just so people can have your direct access?
I will definitely do that if anybody is interested. And I feel bad I could not address the issue of the Kemalism, because that is a very interesting question.
It's okay. We've got a little bit of more time. I'm just wondering if you think, is there any other avenues where you can think to connect Armenians in the diaspora with each other in a way that, even if it's a direct link to individuals, or any other way that we can approach this issue of building relations with Russia?
Well, I think, first of all, both Armenia and the diaspora should have a consensus that this is an important relationship. It's essential to Armenia's existence as a state. And not only that, in this region of the Caucasus, a lot of people frame this as between, you know, the West versus Russia, really. Well, the problem is with this narrative is that in reality, if Russia is not there, then really Turkey is the, you know, power that fills in the void, because the West really isn't physically in the Caucasus. The West is there giving support or maybe making statements, but de facto Turkey is the NATO member. Turkey is the Western rep there. So if Russia's gone, Turkey comes in, and we know, I mean, look at Turkey's record. Look at what they did with Armenians. Look at what they did with the Greeks. Look at what they're doing to the Kurds. Whereas Russia, you know, at least they encourage the multi-ethnic composition of the Caucasus, right? So I think that's one thing. The diaspora has to understand the fundamental importance of this relationship. The diaspora can even play a role in helping bring Russia and United States together to have more of a dialogue, because I don't even think it suits the United States to be in confrontation with Russia. I think the United States and Russia should be having a dialogue. And that's part of our trouble now, that you have, you know, American agencies that want to promote, like, let's say, democracy, quote unquote, in Armenia or Georgia or Ukraine. But Armenians are capable of creating democracy on their own. And you know, you don't want to exclude Russia from this project either, because Russia can develop democracy on its own as well too. So that's what I would have to say about that. That the diaspora in Armenia should have more dialogue on Russia, and there should be more of a realization of the importance of that relationship for Armenia.
Would you go as far as to say things may have been different in September had there been more proactive efforts on this front?
I don't want to get too political, but
no, with that being, yeah, right. Just
I do think so.
Okay.
I do think so. I think that there could have been more proactive efforts. I think that the leadership could have been in Moscow more immediately to alert them about the seriousness of the situation, because it's a threat not only for Armenia, of course, we know Armenians know it's a threat,
right.
but for Russia it's a threat, because if suddenly Turkey, steps in and takes over the whole region, I mean, and already Georgians need to understand this too, because for them it's bad as well too. If the West isn't going to be there,
Exactly.
if
Too far.
Russia's
Right.
gone, Turkey is there.
Right. It's right.
So
there.
that's that. So pick your options. Yeah. So pick your options. And also, I mean, Iran is a partner that Armenia should be developing ties with as well, I would say. So Armenia should be more proactive, not only with Moscow, but also with Tehran. More proactive,
Yeah,
I think.
as I was mentioning.
And if they had, I mean, they have to understand. Yeah.
There's more.
So I love France. I love Paris. I mean, but Macron can only do so much for Armenia, right? And I love Italy. I love Cappuccino. I love, I love Verdi and the opera. But the recognition by Genoa of Artsakh will only take you so far. So you need to work with the people in your neighborhood to solve the issue, to arrest Turkey's aggression, to arrest Azerbaijan's aggression against Artsakh. And that's what you need. You need to be very cognizant of that. You have to be cognizant of the regional realities. And Georgia should be too, quite frankly. Not only Armenia, Georgia needs to understand Erdogan's appetite is far from being satisfied, shall we say. So they should be very, very cognizant of this issue, yes.
And I just want to take a couple minutes to honor our audience and ask a couple questions. Really quick responses if you can, Dr. Charents. Was there any chance that Mikoyan became the chief political bureau of USSR, or is that?
Well, there was actually. I've researched his role in the 1960s constitutional reform, which is really interesting because Khrushchev made him the head of the Nationality Committee, where they were going to revision the USSR as being kind of more of a socialist democratic state. And Mikoyan had this idea of devolving even more powers to the republics, almost making it like a confederation, which is really kind of, wild. But in that whole process, Khrushchev was going to make Mikoyan the head of the state, but also give him much more powers, to kind of give away powers to Mikoyan. Right? Now, what ended up happening is we had only that political reform effort only partially realized. So when there was the coup against Khrushchev in 1964 by his enemies, right, led by Mr. Brezhnev, Mikoyan was left with this, kind of position as like de facto head of the USSR, but it didn't have any teeth because that power was not invested in him as Khrushchev had planned. So that's the short question. I think it could have actually happened. Mikoyan could have been the leader of the real leader of the Soviet Union, had this reform been implemented, and the history of Russia and the Soviet Union would have been dramatically different. Yeah.
Different. Okay, another quick question. Thank you. Is there opportunity to present a quote from Hrant Matevosyan about Mikoyan in Armenia?
Yeah. I mean, about Hrant. I don't know which quote is this by Hrant Matevosyan. But I will say Hrant Matevosyan, he's first of all a wonderful writer, but Armenia, and this is another thing I've actually found, Mikoyan, like I said, supports greater devolution to republics, greater devolution of political powers. And if you ever saw the film We in Our Mountains, 1969, with Frunzik Mukherjee, this is a very famous Armenian film where Sosargsyan plays the police chief, and he comes in and the shepherds don't want to, give him the time of day, that sort of a thing. It really is emblematic of a bigger problem, which is if you're the high official coming in from Moscow or Yerevan, and you're coming into the regions, the people don't want to deal with you because you don't understand the life in the regions, let's say. And that was the whole philosophy that Mikoyan supported, but not only him, Soviet Armenian leaders in general, that listen, we know our affairs best. A super centralized system like under Stalin is not going to work. You have to have, in order to have a real socialism and real democracy, you need to devolve more powers to the republics and to workers, right? So that was the idea. I mean, so if we're thinking about something that's emblematic of that, I go back to Matavosian, the film that he wrote, the Henrik Malian film, We in Our Mountains. I don't know the quote that he had. I don't know which quote this is, but I will say that I am a fan of Matavosian and I love his work. So, yes.
Great. Okay. In 1980s, my classmate Volodyan Mikoyan asked me why his grandfather is not popular in Armenia, appreciated there. Statesman, in his interview to Posner, told that the number of Mikoyan signatures under lists of people to be repressed was minimal and much less than other Politburo members.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have two issues here. So
Yeah.
one about the repressions. First of all, I don't want to minimize the fact that he played a role in the purges, even if it was a forced role, even if he was forced into it. I mean, he still did it, and it's also important for understanding his guilt that informed his later de-Stalinization efforts. So I don't want to downplay that. I mean, that's a real thing. I mean, my assessment of Mikoyan is an objective one as a historian. You have to look at the good and the bad in order to fully understand that historical figure, right? Now, going back to why Armenians, don't appreciate Mikoyan in Armenia, part of the problem is that the history of Mikoyan, as I found out, that his role in Armenia was very, very large, very influential, very significant, but very few people in Armenia knew about it. Even a lot of people in the know usually didn't know much about his role. And my theory is that when Brezhnev comes in, Brezhnev doesn't like Mikoyan at all, right? And so Brezhnev and company really do an effort to kind of, first of all, downplay Khrushchev and Mikoyan and kind of almost kind of slander them. Mikoyan was very popular in the Soviet Union in the late 60s and the 70s. But it's very interesting how after Mikoyan's death in 1978, suddenly there's like a slandering campaign against him, and it also encompasses Armenia. And so some of the idea of, we have this phrase that, what did Mikoyan do for Armenia? Nothing. Well, this is completely false. The overwhelming evidence shows that that's complete garbage. But people believe that because I believe the Brezhnevites in power were invested in discrediting any opposition to their rule, anybody who could represent an alternative path to this stagnated, stale version of the Soviet socialism. And they didn't like that Mikoyan was kind of the alternative. There were moments where Mikoyan would attend an opera in Moscow and he'd get louder applause than Brezhnev if Brezhnev was there. And Brezhnev didn't like that at all. So Brezhnev slowly was getting rid of the privileges and these kind of things. So I think it has to do with that high level political leadership fight. And even Anton Kochinyan in his memoirs writes that in 1982, that there are a lot of unfair things said about Mikoyan, and that we need to, preserve the history because it's going to be lost otherwise.
I got another question while you were speaking, or a little bit before, which is, I think, akin to this one. I was told by a researcher that during Stalin's time, Mikoyan was instrumental in sending Armenians to Gulag. And in fact, he insisted on increasing the number from Armenia to be sent. Do you have any? I do have
information on that. That there was a letter, and I have the original version of it, request to Yeghishe about increasing repressions in Armenia, right? And what ended up happening here is that Mikoyan came into Armenia and he was informed by Melenkov and Litvin of the need to increase repressions in Armenia. And really, this is based on the idea that, Melenkov is in a meeting with Armenian officials who say that there's sabotage afoot in the Republic. Part of this also was Amatuni's effort to save himself. So Amatuni was really promoting this idea that there was sabotage in the Republic, so rely on me, that kind of thing. But Melenkov took at face value, as he would, this idea, because Melenkov was Stalin's hatchet man in Tatarstan, in Belarus, all over the Soviet Union. So Stalin put him out there. Mikoyan was only sent out by Stalin once to Armenia, right? And that was largely to test his loyalty. I also think to send a message to Armenian leaders. But what ended up happening is Melenkov and Litvin told Mikoyan, we have to raise the level of repressions, the quota, the limit, right? And Mikoyan consented to this, right? And in the end, he signed off on it. And the request went to Yeghishe, and Yeghishe requested, increasing what they had proposed. right? So again, the scenario, first of all, I want to show again, Mikoyan is not, innocent. I mean, even if his participation is forced, he is also complicit in what happens. And also to understand again, why he feels guilt, why he does de-Stalinization. It goes back to that earlier history. And I was very fortunate to get the original documents on that, by the way. Again, this comes from Memorial. They helped me find the original documents on that issue.
Wonderful.
But yeah, no, I mean, that's again, we cannot overlook that aspect of Mikoyan too. So there's both negative and you have positive, right? And so that is a real
just along those lines, for how long was Mikoyan a Politburo member?
He was a Politburo member for a very long period of time. I mean, this is somebody who they say in the Russian history is really around from Ilyich Lenin to Ilyich Brezhnev. I mean, this is somebody who had that, longevity all the way from the revolutionary times to really the Brezhnev stagnation. So I think if we're talking about the exact period when he was a Politburo member, this is really, I think, from the 1930s all the way. I have to think about the exact dates.
Okay.
From really the 1930s all the way to really all the way till the 1960s. After that, I mean, really the only position he has in like the 60s and 70s is still as the Supreme Soviet Deputy for Armenia. And because of Brezhnev's intervention, he loses that post in 1974. But before then, he was like governor of North Caucasus in like the 20s. He was also working in Nizhny Novgorod right before then. So, but then he becomes the trade minister. He becomes the man in Soviet trade affairs.
What would you say his attitude was to the diaspora organizations as an Armenian, both during the time he was in the Politburo and after?
I think that, he had I think this is an important question because he had a very,
I don't want to take credit for
yeah,
it.
he had no. He had an antagonistic relationship with the Dazhnaks. And there's even some speculation, I can't say for sure, that Mikoyan himself might have been a Dazhnak at one point. But he had a very antagonistic relationship with them, as did many Soviet Armenian leaders, but he also was open to dialogue with the diaspora. And he was also, despite the fact that he was a Baku revolutionary, he was also open to the Armenian church. There is a moment where he meets up with Vazgen I, the Catholicos of the Armenian church, who, by the way, was college roommates with my uncle, right? And so that's another aspect as well. He had and he also highly valued the diaspora perception of Armenia. This is another reason why he's very invested in the development of Soviet Armenia, because he sees it as a means to project, the benefits of the Soviet Union to the diaspora, and also to emphasize to the diaspora that the Soviet Union, Russia, is our best, pathway to existence and survival, and actually thriving, really. And that's how he looked at it. Now, there also, I would say this, that while the Dazhnaks disliked Mikoyan, and Mikoyan disliked the Dazhnaks, this is not, old home week by any means. The Hunchaks loved Mikoyan, and also Ramgavars. They thought Mikoyan was an Armenian success, that this is what you can accomplish within the Soviet system, right? So I have the good fortune of knowing Ramgavars, Hunchaks, Dazhnaks. I know all these people from all representatives of all these groups, and they all have different, they have different perceptions of Mikoyan. But in general, Ramgavars and Hunchaks are very positive toward him. I talked to Arasanjian, the great scholar and historian, who's a good friend of mine, and he was relaying to me how, again, Hunchaks and Ramgavars, completely different view of Mikoyan than Dazhnaks. Right? So there's that.
Yeah.
But there was also one, but and in general, so that's kind of the whole thing in a nutshell. But I have to also just stress again, I'm incredibly thankful to the Armenian archives and Avag Harutyunyan, and also Amatuni Virabian and Vard Grigoryan, all these people who've helped me in this project. And even Armenia, which I'm now getting citizenship, by the way, for Armenia. So this is another, good thing as well. But also the Russian archives, immensely amazing information, and so much in Armenian in Mikoyan's files. And I was even, translating material for them from Armenian into Russian. So I was kind of helping them out too, in a way. But yeah.
Okay, I mean, that's what, yeah. Why does it have to be exclusive, right? So one more question I definitely want to address is actually two more. Araz asks, how do we reconcile the profile of the Soviet Union as protector with it having provided material support to Kemalists prior to its attack on the First Republic?
Yeah, well, that's a big issue. And I mean, what I would suggest is when you're looking at this as an Armenian, you have to again look with the good with the bad, right? So first of all, the Soviet mentality was that we're looking for like anti-imperialist allies in the world, right, to oppose Kemalists and to, or excuse me, why am I saying that? We're looking for anti-imperialist allies to oppose the British and the French, let's say. And so they thought if we, work with the Kemalist movement, that'll help us. Maybe the Kemalist movement will become communist, right? And that's actually what Mikoyan is expressing years later in this meeting with Armenian historians. But the reality is the Kemalist movement, as we know, was responsible for ethnic cleansing, for giving Armenian territories away. And this is the most interesting thing. When Mikoyan met with Armenian historians in 1962 in Yerevan, and this is very interesting because this is in a period where revisionism is becoming a big thing within Soviet historiography. So before, under Stalin, historiography in the Soviet Union just basically regurgitated anything Stalin said, really, I mean, or the regime said. But under the Thaw, suddenly you had historians who wanted to look at issues more critically. And you had Armenian historians who wanted to examine this issue of Kemalism and Bolshevism because this could throw into question, and it did throw into question, the Armenian loyalty to the Soviet government. So they asked Mikoyan about it, and Mikoyan said, well, look, this is what we thought at the time. That the Bolsheviks were coming off a civil war, and we thought we could be helped by this, so-called revolutionary movement. But he said, we also found it had a chauvinistic side. We found out about it, as it was happening, but it had the chauvinistic side that ethnically cleansed Armenians, we'd lost Armenian territories. There was even an effort, by the way, if you look at Simon Vratian's memoirs that were published in the Armenian Review at the end of the 40s, he mentions about the Bolsheviks later on attempted to renegotiate part of the Moscow Treaty or the Kars Treaty to regain Ani and part of Surmalu for Armenia, and Surmalu being the area where Ararat is located, right? And that was not successful because, when the Turkish forces take over a piece of territory, a piece of property, they usually sit on it and they don't give it back. But Mikoyan was very, insistent on that we have to acknowledge that the Kemalism had a chauvinistic side. There were some Armenian historians saying, well, look, maybe Lenin had this idea, maybe this was a correct, idea because Lenin supported it. Well, Mikoyan said, well, no, we have to look at, as a historian, you have to look at the chauvinistic side of Kemalism too. You have to look at what happened, right? So, I mean, Armenians have to look at both the good and the bad of the Soviet regime. The bad, obviously, territories lost, not only in terms of Kars, Ardahan, Surmalu, but also Nakhichevan. This is a very serious thing. The Karabakh issue being perpetually unresolved. But at the same time, the Soviet Union also provides stability. It provided room for Armenia to develop national institutions, to build up its infrastructure, to really, if you look at Yerevan today, most of that is a legacy of the Soviet times. So that's my point, that we should not, it's very easy to look at history in a black and white way, to say, oh, Soviets are all bad or all good or something. We have to look at both sides, right? So that's kind of how I see it, that there's, and I'm glad I could address the Kemalism question, because that's a very important thing to talk about. And it's amazing that Mikoyan addressed such a controversial question so frankly at the time. So, yes.
Great, wonderful. There is one more question I definitely want to get to. He's been patiently waiting. Mr. Raffi and Patkanyan, can you open your mic? I know you want to ask.
I think I did.
Great.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Arpa. Thank you, Hagop. Thank you, Ani. And thank you, Dr. Petra. This is a good, very beautiful opportunity. And thank you for your fascinating lecture that was based on documents. It was really, really, really academic. I enjoyed it. The quote that I want to narrate now from Hrant Matevosyan. I've been a student in Yerevan State University since like 1980 to 1985, and I was a little bit involved in politics, and they were not happy with me. I met Hrant Matevosyan several times. I invited him to our student dorm, and he lectured for diaspora Spirka High students, and I visited him at home many times, several times. I had long conversations with him. Once he said, and you mentioned about the Sanahin visit and the rehabilitation of writers like Raffi, Charents, Patkanyan, and you said he set basis for Karabakh movement as well. Let's talk about Sanahin visit that you mentioned. Hrant Matevosyan says, you know Hrant Matevosyan, you mentioned, he is the Yergrort Meds Laureate, second great laureate. First one was Tumanyan, second is Hrant Matevosyan. Hrant Matevosyan spoke about this visit to Sanahin. Sanahin, by the way, Mikoyan also is from Lori, and he visited Lori. And during that visit, he had a big feast or dinner at Tumanyan's house. That's what Hrant Matevosyan was telling me. And Tumanyan's widow was alive. And during the feast, during the dinner, Khanjuik, Tumanyan's widow asked him, Matevosyan says, asked him, like, is there any chance to bring Karabakh back to Armenia? Or I don't remember the real words, the meaning that. And Matevosyan says he was a child, and Mikoyan get furious, angry, and started yelling at everyone, especially Tumanyan widow, Olga, the old lady Olga, and said, Karabakh's issue is over. It's closed. I don't want anybody to talk about Karabakh. Karabakh belongs to Azerbaijan. Exactly. This is what Matevosyan told me. So this contradicts many statements that he did for Armenia, and I remember. Yes, I remember.
Can I just say something? I just want to say that I think it does not necessarily contradict, because also have to think this is a guy who supported Armenian leaders to reunify, Artsakh with Armenia, and they would constantly come up against the brick wall that Baku vetoes it. So he also comes with this understanding, it's not going to come back to Armenia anytime soon. As long as Baku vetoes it, we can't do anything. We're stuck. So why do you even bring it up? And this is kind of, it comes out of frustration. There was another quote about this as well, that he said, listen, why do another Armenian asked him about Karabakh, and he said, look, we can't, our hands are tied on this issue. We can help you maybe with infrastructure or some development like this, but on Karabakh we can't do anything. And what he's thinking, what he's understanding, is that Baku is going to veto anything that comes up on this issue.
No problem.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, I understand. Our hands are tied on Karabakh, but he could say the same to the widow Olga Tumanyan, saying our hands are tied. Not to say I don't want anybody to discuss this issue. Karabakh belongs to Azerbaijan. He could say our hands are tied. Right. And that's why Matevosyan, I don't want to say the word, but now I don't have any other place to say it. He said he was dagank. Dagank, I mean, maybe everybody knows what dagank is regarding Karabakh issue only. And I thank you for this opportunity. Really, I didn't have any other opportunity to tell this story. I was the only guest in Matevosyan's house at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think, and it's again, it's an important point to raise too. You have to look again at the critical with, everything else he did. So yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. I definitely do. But again, I don't know. Again, within the Mikoyan home also too, this issue of Karabakh constantly was coming up, and it also affected Sergo Mikoyan's support for the unification of Karabakh with Armenia. But it was something, again, every time the Armenian leadership wanted to do this issue, wanted to unify Karabakh with Armenia, every time it was vetoed by Baku. It was absolutely, this is a situation that was kind of like a perpetual cycle. What's actually interesting is also, why did it turn to violence in 1988? Why did it, instead of just pursuing the normal path where the issue is raised and shut down, raised and shut down, why in 1988 is it raised and then suddenly Armenians are massacred in Sumgait, right? So,
Right.
What about his heirs? Dr. Shakarian, what about his heirs? Are they Armenian?
What do you mean by heirs? I mean, are you talking about their human heirs?
Lineage.
I mean, Armenians, like, what do you mean by this? Like, exactly.
His immediate family.
Oh, his heirs. I thought you said errors. I thought
no,
so I was like,
sorry.
well, his heirs are actually very much in, I mean, are we talking about, so you have his, grandchildren, today. I mean, you have, for instance, I know Vladimir Mikoyan very well.
Are they Armenian? Do they identify with being Armenian?
Yeah. They identify with Armenian, culture. Stas Namin is very, much keeping in touch with Armenian culture. But even more, I would say, Vladimir Mikoyan really is watching Armenian affairs because, this is Sergo's son. Sergo was very, very into Armenian politics. Now, Sergo did not speak Armenian, unlike Anastas, but Sergo was very, very much closely tied with what developments were happening in the Armenian Republic. He had very good personal relations in the Armenian Republic. And so he passed it on to his son with what's happening in Armenia and what was going on in Armenia, following the Armenian news as religiously as anybody in the diaspora would be. So yeah, no, the family today for the Armenian identity, it was always a very, very big thing. And that's one of the first things you discover when you're researching. All those assumptions people might make that, he's not, truly Armenian, that he's more of a Muscovite, he's more of a Soviet, he didn't do things for Armenia, sort of thing. That in reality is contradicted by when you actually research it and dig into it. I mean, I'm open to anything. If there's evidence that he, hurt Armenia or did something like this to Armenia, I'm open to looking at that too. But just the evidence shows that he really was very interested in Armenian affairs. Not only Mikoyan, not only Anastas, but Sergo, also Artyom Mikoyan. They all were very much invested in what was happening in Armenia and in the Armenian, Soviet Armenia, and even post-Soviet Armenia. So.
And I know I said that this would be your last question, but we have one more that we didn't address anything related to sort of Lebanese Armenian politics and Mikoyan. So do you have any evidence of his role in sending Tatul Altunian song and dance ensemble to Beirut in 1959, which put an end of Armenians' communal killings at the time?
Well, I don't know about that specifically. It would be very interesting. I will say this, though. I don't have evidence about that. That's my short answer. But I will say this, that Armenian students in the Thaw, after Khrushchev's speech, Khrushchev's Thaw in Armenia basically, was like a release. Like if we look at Regina Gazarian's painting, it's a release. Armenians are being killed in Turkey in 1955, Istanbul pogrom. Why isn't the Soviet government condemning it, right? France condemned it, but the Soviet government didn't condemn it. This was a big issue that was brought up. You look at the official reports, they were talking about this. And Mikoyan actually did bring it up to Nixon in 1959. He was telling Nixon, he said, look, because Nixon was bringing up this idea of, the repressed peoples, in the Eastern Bloc, this sort of a thing, that this is a resolution of repressed peoples before Congress, and or captive nations, I should say, before Congress. And Mikoyan said, well, look, how can you play this supposed role in the United States as being the sponsor for captive nations when, Armenians are being, their rights are being denied in Turkey. The Armenians are being discriminated against in Turkey. How can you have this position, right? And this actually made some news a few years ago. Somebody uncovered it. I think it was Emil Sanamian uncovered it in the online in like National Security Archives or Wilson Center archives, and it took off. There were op-eds written about it, but the context was that the Armenian students were criticizing the Soviet government for not, raising this issue of, Turkey's mistreatment of, its Armenian minority with the Istanbul pogrom in 1955. So there is that. I don't know about the Altunyan, story in 1959. If you have any information on that, please send it to me, because I'd be thrilled if I could find information on that. But yeah.
And again, Professor Shakayan left his email in the chat box. So please write down his email. It's in the chat box. And while you do that, we'll open the mic up to one final question by Mr. Ruben Injikian.
Yes, thank you, Anne. Thank you very much, Pietro, for such phenomenon of studies on Mikoyan from a diaspora scholar. This is very encouraging because, unfortunately, in Armenia, the image of Mikoyan is controversial, and we should learn as a nation to hail our heroes. And in Russian Empire history and Soviet Empire history, there were two Armenians. Loris Melikov, the prime minister of Tsar Alexander, and Mikoyan, the president of the Soviet Union. And he played a huge role in Caribbean crisis. And he also is, in the Soviet people's memory, is one of the Soviet leaders who left a heritage of producing consumer goods of high quality. And that was very important for Soviet people who lived in the situation of shortages of consumer goods. And the best sausages of Mikoyan factory is known in all Russian society. They call it Mikoyanovsky Zavod. Yes. So that is important to enter into psyche of Armenia proper and diaspora Armenians. So we should learn, so what is his role in Caribbean crisis? Can you explain to us?
Well, his Caribbean crisis role, right? I mean, I know about this, but I haven't studied this as in depth as his role in de-Stalinization or Armenia, but I do know. I've read the book. I've read actually books about it. But basically, the story goes that after the initial Cuban Missile Crisis, there was also a Soviet Cuban Missile Crisis, some crisis between the Soviet Union and Cuba. Because what happened was Castro didn't want to remove the missiles from the island, right? They were still, aimed at United States. And the Soviet government had agreed, Khrushchev and Kennedy agreed to get rid of the missiles. And so they had to do something to, remedy this situation that Castro was refusing to give them up. Castro felt like he had been played like a pawn on the superpower chessboard. So the USSR sent Mikoyan to Havana to talk to Castro. Mikoyan's wife, Ashken, died as this was happening. It was a huge tragedy, but he couldn't even go back to the Soviet Union to even attend her funeral. That's how critical the situation was. And he had to sit down and talk to Castro, and eventually he persuaded Castro to remove the missiles from Cuba. So he also played a key role in diffusing the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was actually kind of like, if we have like this idea of a good cop, bad cop, I mean, Khrushchev, with his temper, was prone to doing very emotional things. Mikoyan took a much calmer approach. He was consistently opposed to using violence in situations like Hungary, right? So Hungary, Khrushchev said, send in the tanks. Mikoyan didn't want to send in the tanks. He said, we could, talk and we could negotiate, and we should not, go with a solution such as this. Right. So, yeah, I mean, he had that kind of calming effect on Khrushchev. And on this issue, he also calmed, as it were, the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that's actually something that people know. People know about Mikoyan Cuban Missile Crisis. People know about Mikoyan that he, like you said, consumer goods. He brought pak bahak to the kiddos. I mean, he helped with the beef steaks, all this. And people know about, on the other side, his role in the terror, or his role in Stalin's purges. But nobody really talks about his role in de-Stalinization, his role in, especially his role with nationality policy and in Armenia. And that's actually what I've discovered. It's a completely new chapter in understanding Mikoyan. And yeah, I hope you guys, certainly you, you seem to have enjoyed this presentation, but I hope this will enhance not only our knowledge of Mikoyan and the importance of Mikoyan, but also I would say, I hope that this allows us to have an entry point into studying the Soviet Armenian history more, which has been very understudied in my point of view.
Professor Charents, you inspire more and more questions as you speak more. But I think we could close with you just talking a little bit about, I know you were a supporter of the Velvet Revolution, you said, and the questions being asked now of me are what directions, I think this is a good community question, what directions should Armenia follow in the future?
Well, this is a big question, and I don't know.
Maybe three top things we should look at in the next 5 years.
First of all, I think get your house in order. I mean, get everything cleaned up at home, but also repair relations with Russia. I would actually say, and this is not really in any order, but I think get your own house in order, repair relations with Russia. Also have a more realistic foreign policy. Understand that you can't depend on the West to save the day. On the other hand, I would say that it's important to have good relations with the West. Armenia shouldn't just turn its back on it. The problem should be that there shouldn't be an either or choice for post-Soviet states, right? And a third point, I don't know what exactly could be a third point, but I think in general, if we are to build democracy, Armenia should actually start, and this kind of rolls into the point of getting your house in order. Two things, I would actually say. Number one, the way in which we think about economics in Armenia should change in the sense that we should think more about this poverty issue, resolving it, creating opportunities for the people, that this is a national security issue at the end of the day. More opportunities should be created for Armenians to be mobile in the Republic, to feel that they're invested in the success of the Republic. So that's number one. Number two, there should also be kind of an accord among the political forces of Armenia. Armenians, are fighting with each other all the time. Instead of fighting against each other, instead of, attempting to prosecute each other or something, there should be an effort to, kind of find a peace, in the society, instead of this kind of what they called hate speech. And I don't mean hate speech in terms of kind of the idea in the United States about race or something, but I'm saying in terms of the Armenian context, Armenian political context, there has to be more dialogue and there has to be less hostility for different points of view.
Between Armenians.
Right. So
Armenians.
Between Armenians. So that I guess kind of rolls into the idea of getting your house in order, to give you specifics. But definitely, and I think that that's actually one of my critiques of Pashinyan, and this was one of my disappointments with the Velvet Revolution, that it was that he could have done more on the socioeconomic question and less on this, politics as usual in Armenia, which is going after former authorities, this kind of thing. But again, I don't want to get too political on these questions, but I think that, yeah, there should be much more focused on, if you want real democracy, there has to be a kind of an economic democracy, so every citizen feels that they're invested in the system, and that they are that they have the ability to pull themselves up or be mobile within that system.
Your comment reminds me of the old joke about you get 3 Armenians in a room and you get 4 political parties.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Different notion, really, the collective, and working together on a common front on the macro issues.
Yes.
And unfortunately, we've run out of time, so we are going to have to leave the conversation there. I want to thank Professor Pietro Charents for taking these hard questions, and to all of you for watching. And before I turn it over to Dr. Panosyan, I wanted to share the byline of Dr. Charents' email address, which I love. It's called, he quotes Alexander Pushkin. He says, "You cannot find inspiration. It of itself must find the poet." Thank you from me, Ani Shabazian, and the whole team here at the ARPA Institute. Dr. Panosyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ani, and thank you, Dr. Charents, for this very nice, very good research presentation. Of course, we would like to specify that any idea that was presented is not necessarily that of the ARPA Institute. Now, if you would like to have us do more work, as I said, please donate. And also, if you know anybody who would be interested in listening to these kind of presentations and panel discussions, please ask them to send us their email addresses, because that's how we send the announcements. Now, our next event, which is also very interesting, will be the Minister of High Technology Industry, Mr. Haik Chobanyan, if the elections turn out to be what is with the current government, and if he still is the minister. But he has agreed to present his plans for the future development of the industry of Armenia. We will send you the announcements eventually if things progress in the right direction. Thank you all, and again, please donate to ARPA Institute. We'll see you next time.